Build for the Future with Jehovah's Organization.
When I received this outline to speak directly to the young people, I thought, this is one of the best ideas that the branch has come up with in a long time. You see, this outline, this discussion this evening is designed to be able to help our young ones. And when we talk about young ones, by the way, we're talking about individuals that maybe are approaching the age of getting baptized. Maybe individuals that are already in their youth, that they're young individuals or teenagers. Maybe they've already made their dedication and symbolized that with water baptism, all the way up through young married couples. And so you'll see how the information really applies to those as we go along. But when you look at the outline and you listen to the information this evening, you'll come to the conclusion that Jehovah's Organization really, really loves that group of people we're talking about. And this talk is an expression of that love. And it gives the opportunity for young ones to really reflect upon one of the hardest decisions they ever make in their life. And that is, what are you going to do with your life? Really, what are we going to do with our life? And so it's a real privilege to be able to share this information, because as part of Jehovah's Organization, Sister Fields and I love our young people as well. They're very, very valuable. And some ask us sometimes, do you have children? And well, we don't have any little Jeans and Shirleys, but we must have 200 or 300 children. We've adopted them all over the country. We look forward to getting to know some of these young ones well enough to adopt them as well. Now, there are a couple I've already found out I don't want to do that. No, just anyway, as you can tell as we go along in this information, that there's a lot in here that people as young as I am and a little older than I am have already learned by experience, that there are a lot of things that we're going to say this evening that are very, very valuable to our youth making good decisions. You see, in our age and in our years of experience, we and your parents, as well as the elders, have already figured out that the only way to make a success of life is to serve your God. And you as a young person have already figured out that you want to be happy. So when you put our experience together with your desire to be happy and with the direction given in God's Word, we have a perfect setup to be able to help our young ones to live a life that they don't have any regrets, to be able to really make a good decision about what they're going to do with their years. You see, it boils down to this. Whatever age you are, this is true. Even some that are old enough to be retired have to figure out what to do now. But the simple matter is this, that all of us have a certain amount of days, a certain amount of weeks, a certain amount of months, years, maybe even decades left to live in this system of things. We simply don't know how many more years there are in this system. So we have to decide, what are we going to do with those days, months, weeks, decades, whatever it might be. What are we going to do with the rest of our life? Don't you think it would be best to get ideas from Jehovah as to what's best, to be able to really be happy, to be able to focus on things that are important? So what will you focus on in your life? What will you do in the remainder of this system of things? What will you do that will really, really help you to be happy, to be successful, and have a peaceful life? Well, first of all, we'd have to say that the world, many adults, and sometimes, sad to say, even Christian parents, make the mistake of recommending success from the world's viewpoint. They do this by the way they live their lives. They do this by the things they suggest. Your counselors at school and what have you may tell you, this is what you need to do. This is where success comes from. They have a whole different vantage or idea of what brings about success. They may tell you it's being popular. They may tell you it's making a lot of money. They may tell you it's having a big home or having a prestigious job or something like that. But did you know, in simple short words, what the world recommends as success has absolutely, positively nothing to do with real success. Now, why do we say that? Let's look in the Bible and find out. Luke chapter 12 to start with. You may remember that Jesus was discussing with his disciples there in the first century, and he gave a very strong point. And interestingly, we're going to talk more about this in our Public Talk Sunday as we're talking to adults as well as young people. But if you look in Luke chapter 12, in verse 15, he made a powerful point about what the world today would say was success. Look at verse 15. It says, "Then he said to them, keep your eyes open and guard against every sort of covetousness." Notice why. Because even when a person has an abundance, his life does not result from the things he possesses. People of the world will tell you the more money you have, the more material things you have, the more successful you are. Jesus said that's wrong. He said you can have all the riches in the world and you'll not get life out of that. Now friends, we want life and we want an everlasting life. Jesus said those material things won't buy it. You may know of some individuals that have made a tremendous amount of money. The richest man in the world died here a few years ago. He owned the largest retail business in the world, richest man in the world. And do you know he died just as dead as a poor man? Just as dead as if he didn't have a nickel. And if he didn't have a good relationship with Jehovah, then he doesn't have anything. That's what Jesus was trying to tell us. Now look further. Let's suppose that you do make it rich in this system. 1 John chapter 2. And let's say you make it well in this system of things and you do what they say is success and what have you. Notice what Jesus or John said further in 1 John chapter 2, starting in verse 15. Starting there in verse 15 of 1 John chapter 2, the Bible says, "Do not be loving either the world or the things in the world." Now notice down in verse 17 why he said, "Do not be loving the things in the world." He said, "Furthermore, the world is passing away, and so is its desire. But," he said, "he that does the will of God remains forever." Did you catch that one? You could do anything you wanted to in the world, and you know what? It's still going to pass away. You're going to lose it all. Now, as I was reading those two verses and trying to think about how to illustrate or how to help our young ones to get the meaning of that, I tried to think of something to reach the heart of the young ones. Now, by the way, I want you to know that as a brother, that when I was your age, if someone was over 30, to me they were old. I'm 31, and so I know no doubt, that some of the young ones are probably wondering if this information is really going to fit their circumstance or not. And I'll tell you this, it's not easy to make this discussion with the desire to reach your heart and afraid that we don't reach your heart. So please don't look at this information as someone coming from someone who doesn't know what it's like to be young, because I can remember. And I wasn't in the truth when I was young. So I know what the world has to offer. So keep this in mind as we go along. So I was trying to think of some way to be able to reach your heart as I worked on this information. And so I want you to do something for me in the next few weeks if you get a chance. And maybe you've done this recently, but if you haven't, please do this. I want you to visit a nursing facility. Now, when I'm talking about a nursing home, I'm not talking about a rehab center. I'm talking about one of those facilities where the people in the neighborhood are taken when they're old and sick, and they're not going to go home. You know the ones I'm talking about? The people where they're in the wheelchairs, they're in their beds, they can't get out. They don't know who they are. They don't know what condition they are. The only hope they have is someone will keep them comfortable until the end of this system of things. Now, I want you to go there and look at those individuals, visit with some of those older people in that nursing home or in that care facility, and think about this as you do. In this world today, you can pursue any career you want to. You can pursue any field of activity you want to. You can make millions of dollars, billions of dollars. You can be the richest person in the world. You can be famous. You can be rich and famous. You can be highly esteemed by your peers, be a leader in your field, even have a measure of happiness in doing all of this. And the end result is exactly the same. If you don't die first, you're going to wind up in the care facility. Now, that's not meant to scare anyone, and that's not meant to be crude or anything else. That is simply to illustrate the point that the only person that can offer you more than a life in a nursing home is Jehovah God. It's just about that simple, isn't it? It's just about that cut and dry. You can be anybody or anything, and you're going to wind up in a care facility or something worse if you don't die first. So don't you think it would make good sense then for all of us, no matter what our ages are, to build our relationship with Jehovah? To really build our future with Jehovah's organization. Put our life, our energy, and to our young people we say put your youth into your service for Jehovah, because he's got something better in mind than a care facility, I'll tell you for sure. So let's notice what he recommends that young people should do. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. No doubt you're familiar with this verse, but we want to look at it real close this evening. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and let's just read together the first verse, and notice the recommendation that God's Word makes. And it uses the term youth, or young ones. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 1. It says, "Remember now your grand Creator in the days of your young manhood." And by the way, we could say womanhood as well. It says, "Before the calamitous days proceed to come, or the years have arrived when you'll say, I have no delight in them." Basically, this verse is saying, while you're young, before those days come that you're going to be in the nursing home, use your life to serve God. In another translation, this is today's English Bible, it renders that verse this way. It says, "Remember your Creator while you're still young." This evening, we want to focus in on the word remember. You notice it's used in that verse. We want to discuss in detail how that word is used in the Bible. First of all, it would mean more than just saying to remember who Jehovah is while you're a young person. Let's look at a couple of verses of how that word is used. Go to Luke chapter 12. In this account, we're going to be looking at the account where Jesus was put to death. Remember, he has the evildoers on both sides of him, and he's talking with this one young evildoer. It's in Luke chapter 12, or excuse me, Luke chapter 23. Sorry about that. Luke chapter 23. And we're interested in verse 42. And you'll remember what this person said, this evildoer said to Jesus, but let's reason on it for a moment. Chapter 23, verse 42. It says, "And he went on to say, Jesus, remember me when you get in your kingdom." Now there's our word that we're talking about is remember. What do you suppose this evildoer meant when he said to Jesus, remember me when you get in your kingdom? Do you think he wanted Jesus to think, oh yeah, I remember that guy that died on the stake beside of me. Poor guy, he's dead. Do you think that's what the man wanted when he said, remember me? Or do you think he wanted Jesus to remember him and resurrect him when he got into his kingdom? Another account that you can think about is when Joseph was imprisoned and he was talking to the cupbearer. And he said to the cupbearer, he said, remember me to Pharaoh. Now again, you remember the circumstance. Joseph was in prison, and he told the cupbearer after he had revealed what his dream meant to him and what have you. He said, when you get back to Pharaoh, be sure and tell him who I am, and to remember that I'm the one that can foresee these dreams and what have you through the help of Jehovah. You see, he wanted some action on that cupbearer's part. He didn't want him to say, oh, you got this old boy down there in a dungeon named Joseph, and he told me to tell you I was down there. He wanted more. He wanted some action on his part. Let's look at another one. Go to the book of Job. And each one of these use the word remember. This is Job chapter 14. And you remember this situation. Job was in pretty bad condition. He was sick. He had many discouraging, depressing things happen to him. And he was at the point that he felt it would be better to die. Job chapter 14, look at verse 13. And again, we see the word remember being used in this verse. It says, oh, that in Sheol you would conceal me, that you would keep me secret until your anger turns back, that you should set a time limit for me and remember me. What was Job asking Jehovah to do? Do you suppose that he was wanting Jehovah to go ahead and let him die, or take his life, put him in the grave, and then sometime later Jehovah would say, oh yeah, there was a time I was supposed to remember old Job. You know, he's been dead for a few years now, poor Job. Or do you think he wanted him to do something? He wanted him to remember. He wanted him to resurrect him. Now, as we look at the word remember in the Bible, one authority says this. It says the Hebrew word translated remember often implies affection of the mind and the action that accompanies remembering. It has to do with affection of the mind and the action that has to do with remembering. The account that the outline used to illustrate that point was when the Israelites left Egypt. Remember, they were in the wilderness and they were thinking about the leeks and the onions and the fish and the melons and all of that. And it said they remembered those things. And you remember what they wanted to do? We went through the Isaiah prophecy book, kept talking about that, and they wanted to go back and have some leeks and onions. See, they had affection for those things. They had a desire. They weren't just remembering them. They were going to take some action involved with that. In the Bible further, there are other individuals like Job who prayed to God to remember the good that they had done and resurrect them. Individuals like Hezekiah, Nehemiah, David, and an unnamed psalmist pleaded to be remembered with affection by Jehovah for their faithfulness. So when Jehovah says, as a young person, remember your God in your youth, he's not talking about just thinking. He's talking about action. He's talking about doing something with your life as a young individual. So as a youthful individual, are we remembering Jehovah with affection? And are we allowing that remembering to move us to some kind of positive action in Jehovah's care? Are we remembering Jehovah and trying diligently to avoid anything that might cause him to feel hurt or to feel pain or to not be pleased with us? See, it takes action. It takes work. One youth said this, said, "Mother helped me to recognize that Jehovah has feelings, and at an early age I was aware that my actions had an effect on God." See, that individual remembered Jehovah with affection and with some action in behalf of that. Another young person said this, "I knew that my actions would either help or hinder in answering the challenge that Satan made to Jehovah. I wanted to make Jehovah's heart glad, so that helped me and helps me down to this day." So when we say, and Jehovah says, remember your Creator, we're talking about using your mind. And we're talking about using your physical power and your energy to serve Jehovah in these last days that we live in. So how do we know Jehovah wants you to do that as a young person? There are several indicators, several things that help us to appreciate that. First of all, Jehovah invites you to build a future with his organization. Actually, he invites you to build a future with the only organization on the face of the earth that's going to survive. And you have the privilege of being firsthand involved, deeply involved, building your career with that organization. And you're right now experiencing part of the love of that organization. And Jehovah knows what we're doing. He knows what you're doing. Now go to Psalm 11, please. In the 11th Psalm, we find that Jehovah, residing in the heavens, watches individuals to see how they're doing spiritually. Just read with me, please, Psalm 11, starting in verse 4. And when we first read this, it might seem a little bit frightful to us as a young person or even as an older person. But no need to be. We'll explain that. Look at verse 4, Psalm 11. It says, "Jehovah is in his holy temple. Jehovah in the heavens is his throne. His own eyes behold, his own beaming eyes examine the sons of men. Jehovah himself examines the righteous ones as well as the wicked one." Now again, we say that might seem a little bit frightful when you first read it. But in researching this, and you may remember in the day text a few weeks ago, it made the comment that Jehovah is watching individuals not to find shortcomings or to condemn us. But to quote the Watchtower, it says that Jehovah is watching us, observing our efforts so that he can answer our prayers for help and forgiveness. Now, isn't that wonderful? Jehovah's watching each and every one of us so that when we make mistakes and we ask for forgiveness, he knows whether or not to extend that forgiveness. And he's watching us so that when we ask for help, he knows exactly how to help us. See, it's a positive watching, not something that we would feel uncomfortable about. It's like parents watching their children to make sure they stay out of danger. You can imagine a parent watching a young child playing in the yard, not watching them to be critical, but watching them to be helpful. And that's the way Jehovah watches us. You see, he's watching us and because he wants us to understand the truth. He wants you to understand the truth. And he invites each and every one of us to prove to ourselves just what the truth is. The Bible says we should prove that to ourselves on a daily basis so that we can have a good relationship with him. To help our young people, Jehovah requires your Christian parents, your believing parents, to teach you from the time you're a baby. As long as they have anything, as long as they can breathe the breath of air, they're required to teach you and help you to serve Jehovah. Even when you do not have believing parents, The congregation, the elders, the other brothers and sisters are here to help you to be able to know how to use the Bible, how to preach the good news, how to live your lives, how to know what to focus on in life. Even further than that, in the field ministry, your parents and others train you. In the congregation, you're encouraged to develop a self-sacrificing spirit. You're encouraged to buy out time to do God's will. As a matter of fact, you're even encouraged as a young one by God's Word and by the organization to be honest with yourself about what you're doing with your life, about what you're doing with your time. Are you spending a lot of time on entertainment, sports, secular pursuits, things like that? Our young married couples, it's sad to say that we find that many of our young married couples get married and then they start pursuing what the world calls a normal life. They both get a job, they both settle into having things, maybe they try to get a home and start having different things and what have you. That's the world's form of success. See, Jehovah's organization and Jehovah asks us to think seriously about what we're doing with our lives, especially if we're young individuals. If you're a young married individual, why would you want to live the normal life of the world when you could live in Jehovah's organization? All of us have been encouraged that if at all possible, the whole family should pioneer. But if that's not possible, can one individual in the family pioneer? Do we really need two incomes to be able to survive? Or have we just gotten used to having a little bit extra? See, those are things that our young ones would want to ask ourselves. And on top of that, Jehovah's encouraged us to learn to be self-sacrificing, to be an individual who has self-control, to display those good qualities. Do you display self-control by holding to a good Bible study schedule? Do you attend meetings regularly? Are you fulfilling your assignments as a young person? Are you sharing regularly in the field service? See, all of those are vital questions as to what you're doing as a young person with your life. And building your future with Jehovah's organization also means not putting off dedication. Let's go to the book of James. And we're going to touch on a very sensitive subject for a couple of moments, especially with some of our parents, because some of our parents are afraid for their young ones to make a dedication because they're fearful that they can't live up to it. And sometimes parents will try to hold their young ones back. Sometimes we find that young ones hold back thinking that, well, if they get baptized, they're responsible. But we want to look at the scriptural viewpoint of that and reason on that. James chapter 4, verse 17. Notice what Jehovah says, the principle here, verse 17. He said, therefore, if one knows how to do what's right and yet does not do it, it is a sin for him. Does that apply to dedication and baptism? If an individual knows what to do, is it wrong to not make a dedication to get baptized? The Watchtower applies that very point. I'm going to be quoting to you from the 1987 Watchtower, the April 15th issue, and I'm starting on page 12 of that article. 87 Watchtower, April 15th, starting on page 12. In this article, it's discussing the instruction that Jehovah gave to the 6 armed men in Ezekiel's vision. They had smashing instruments. Remember that? It quotes Ezekiel 9, verse 5 and 6. In part that says, old man, young man, and virgin, and little child and woman you should kill off to a ruination. But to any man upon whom there is the mark, do not go near. Now the Watchtower comments on that very verse. It says this: of course, children too young to make a dedication would be protected by a parent's mark if that parent is striving to bring the children up to love Jehovah and if they are obediently responding. Now, aren't you glad that's the way Jehovah is? That instead of killing off our children when the Great Tribulation comes, if they are too young to make a dedication and we're trying to raise our children in the truth and they're responding to that, then they're going to make it on our mark or on our faithful service as parents. Isn't that a wonderful provision? Later in the article it says this: yet, if a child is intelligent enough to make a personal decision and has reached a point where he knows how to do what's right, do not presume that he will continue indefinitely under the merit of his parents' mark. End of quote. So what's that saying? That is simply saying this, that there is going to come a time when one's age and maturity dictate that they should make their own dedication and get baptized. Now you recognize, and you probably noted, that we didn't put an age on that. Some young people are very mature at a younger age. Some are very immature at an older age. But the point is this, that there will come a time, unless there's some problems, maybe due to birth defects or other matters that we have no control over, there will come a time in each young person's life that will dictate that they need to make a dedication and get baptized. It's just that simple. Now again, we emphasize it's up to the children and up to the parents to make that decision. But remember the point that James said, it's wrong to not do that when they're old enough to make that decision. So if young ones are old enough to make decisions about other matters in life, and parents are letting them do that, then it may be time, and I'm talking about not just little decisions, but maybe some other matters in life, maybe how they dress, what they wear, who they associate with. Maybe they're old enough to give serious consideration to dedication as well. We leave that up to you parents and to young ones, but there is a limit. So for our young ones, we ask these questions, just to help you to be able to see how you're doing as an individual in building your relationship with Jehovah. It's not a test, but it sure would be a good one. So maybe you can just note the answers to these questions. Does the present pattern of my life exhibit a course of self-sacrifice? Does the present pattern of my life exhibit a course of self-sacrifice? Now that's a good question for you, what you call them, middle senior moments or whatever you called it earlier. Is it a good question for all of us? What's our life indicate about self-sacrifice? Second question, do my goals point to such a life? So as a young person, do you have goals set that as you get older and you get, maybe you become dedicated, baptized, get married, maybe you've already done those things, what are your goals going to lead to? Is it going to be a life in this system, or a life dedicated, a life in Jehovah's organization, a career there? Third, can I expand the time I spend in my public sacrifice of praise? Can I expand the time I spend in my field service activity or public sacrifice of praise? And fourth, am I able to reach out for the privilege of pioneer service, Bethel service, or missionary service? Or can I move to an area where there's a greater need for kingdom publishers? See, all of those are vital questions that would help you to see if you're building a career with Jehovah's organization or you're building a future in this system of things. Spiritual goals, do you have them? Now there's a very, very good chance that we've not said anything this evening thus far that our young ones don't already know. As a matter of fact, you've probably heard all these points, isn't it true? Did you know some of our young ones are mature enough and spiritually minded enough that they probably have said some of these same things to their young brothers and sisters, probably given the same advice that I've said this evening. So why is it then, since we know these things as young people, and this is nothing new, why is it then that some of our young ones hold back and do not build their future with Jehovah's organization? Why is it that some do not build a close relationship with Jehovah's organization or with Jehovah? Well, I want to know the answer to those questions as well. So as I was working on this outline, sorry to say I didn't have a chance to talk to you young ones in this congregation, but I took the opportunity to discuss with some of the young ones in this circuit why some young ones do not build a relationship with Jehovah's organization. And I kept reasonably good notes, and I came up with 3 top reasons why some young people do not follow the course of advice that they themselves know. These 3 reasons are not listed in any order of priority. They just one of them had to be first. So the first reason is this: fear. Fear that you might not stand firm in your dedication. Now that's a reasonable thing, isn't it? As long as we don't let it hold us back. So that's number 1, fear that you might not stand up or stand firm in your dedication. Number 2, perhaps some of our young ones feel that they're not needed in Jehovah's organization, that the elders and other mature brothers and sisters handle all the responsibility and get all the privileges. That was number 2. Number 3, it also has to do with fear afraid that you might miss out on something enjoyable in this system of things. If you dedicate your life to God and build your relationship with His organization, you might miss out on something in this system. So let's take those three things one at a time and see if we can dispel your fears and your anxieties. First of all, fear of failure. What if you get baptized? Would you be able to stand firm for righteous principles? As we mentioned earlier, some parents have that fear, some young ones have that fear, but let me reason with you this way. If you know the truth, and most of you young ones here tonight know the truth, did you know you're already responsible? You're just as responsible as if you're dedicated. Isn't it true that if you know the truth, and you do not live up to that truth, you do not live up to the standards of Jehovah's people, then you have to be disciplined and dealt with by the congregation, just real similar to the fact if you were baptized. So it really makes no difference in the way you're handled in the congregation. You still can be an individual that's told by the congregation that you're not a good one to associate with, baptized or unbaptized, it doesn't matter. So furthermore, when you think about it, making a decision to get dedicated, to make a dedication and get baptized would actually enlist more help from Jehovah. Now, why do I say that? Well, let's pretend for a couple of minutes that you're Jehovah. Now, I know that's never going to happen, but let's pretend that you're Jehovah. And as you're looking and observing, as it said in the Psalms earlier, and you're looking at young ones in the congregation, and you have two young people that you're observing, and both of them are old enough and mature enough to make a dedication. One does not because they're afraid they can't do what you want them to do. The other one decides to make a dedication and get baptized. Now, if you were Jehovah, which one of those two would you have a tendency to be more supportive of? The one that wouldn't do what you recommended because they were afraid, or the one that did do what you recommended because they loved you? Don't you know you'd be more supportive of the one that did and knew to do than someone who held back? And added to that, if you are an individual who knows what to do and you make your dedication, it's not a disadvantage, but it is an advantage. Now, it is true you're responsible, baptized or unbaptized, but did you know the Watchtower indicated that all new Christians, after baptism, with almost all of them, their appreciation for the truth deepens. Now you feel more responsible. And that's a good feeling. One young brother said this. He said, getting baptized as a youngster was a protection for me. As I got older, I noticed how some unbaptized teenagers in the congregation felt free of the authority of the elders and as a consequence veered into bad conduct. He said, but I always remembered that I had dedicated my life to God. My life was already taken, so I could not follow those other teenagers. Powerful protection. So dedication is not a question of whether you should or should not serve Jehovah. All intelligent creation should serve Jehovah. Dedication in baptism is a matter of will you serve Jehovah or not. It's not a matter of should you, it's will you. Now, some are afraid to make the commitment. And commitment's a big thing. It is hard to make a commitment like that. But to help you to make the commitment, and I encourage you to do that if you're old enough to do it and mature enough, it reminds me of a brother that I knew that he was a regular pioneer and was married and had a home, and he had a little business that he worked in to be able to support his pioneering and his wife. Part of his business entailed putting sunroofs in brand new cars. So here he's got a $30,000 car, and he stands to make a couple $100 putting a sunroof in. But as you can imagine, it would put a little sweat on your brow to cut a hole in the top of a brand new car. $30,000 versus $200 profit. And who wants a $30,000 car with a hole in the top of it, right? So this brother had found himself kind of interesting. He had taken the training. He knew how to put these sunroofs in. He knew what he was doing. Just like you've been trained in the ministry, you've been trained in God's Word, you know what you're doing. But this brother would bring a car in sometimes, and he said that he would walk around and around that car, sometimes for a half a day, worried about drilling a hole in the top of it, cutting a hole in the top of it, because he was afraid of committing himself to it. But then he would even try to think of ways, he'd try to talk himself out of doing it. He knew he needed the money, and he knew he could do it, but he was scared. And so then he would try to think of some way he could tell the dealership that he was working for that he couldn't do that. But he'd go look back in his file, and just a few weeks ago he did a car exactly like this for the same dealership. So they know he knows how to do it. So there's no way he can get out of it. He has to do it. So this brother learned to do something that was very helpful to him. Sometimes he would waste that half a day walking around and around, and then he'd wind up putting it in anyway. So he got a little table on a roll-around wheels, and he laid all the tools out on this table that it took to put a sunroof in a car before he ever went and picked up the car. He would plug up his drill motor and put the largest drill bit that he could find in that drill. Hook it up and lay it there, and then he'd go get the car. As soon as he drove it in his shop, he'd grab that drill and pop a hole right in the top of the car. You see, that's called commitment. You drill a hole through the top of a brand new car, down through the headliner, and you watch those drill findings, whatever, fall down in the seat of that car, whatever. Do you know what you're going to do? You are going to put a sunroof in it. And interestingly, 45 minutes to an hour later, not a half a day later, but 45 minutes to an hour later, the brother made his money, he had the sunroof in, and everything was fine. So we suggest to you young people, it may be time to punch the hole. It might just, give it some serious thought. What are you going to do? Commit yourself to Jehovah. And I'm not just talking about dedication and baptism. You may be baptized already. But make a commitment to Jehovah to do something with his organization. Don't spend your life in this system. Wow. Do something in Jehovah's organization. So make that commitment. Don't hesitate about doing that. So regardless of age, when a youth or an adult meets the scriptural qualifications, he should get baptized and he should be anxious to serve Jehovah. Now our second thing that we found is that feeling that you're not needed in Jehovah's organization. According to the latest yearbook, there were almost 259,000 people baptized last year. If you break that down, that's about 5,000 people a week. That's about upwards of 700 people a day. If you divided that 700 by a congregation the size of yours, that means with 100 plus publishers in each congregation, we would have 7 new congregations every day. 700 people a day, 100 people in each congregation, 7 new congregations a day. Do you realize that means that every day worldwide that we need 35 elders every day, 35 ministerial servants every day, 7 days a week. That means that every 3 days we need a new circuit overseer. Shows you how valuable we are. Every 3 days we need a new one. Every time we need a new circuit overseer, we need 2 new assembly overseers, at least 2. We need 2 new assistant assembly overseers, cleaning overseers, sound overseers, attendant overseers, parking overseers for our circuit assemblies. Every few weeks then we need a whole district convention committee and their assistants. Every month we need a new district overseer with just that many people coming into truth. Now when you look at that and think about all of those responsibilities, would you say that the elders today that we have and the ministerial servants today that we have would be able to fulfill that need? Absolutely not. We have congregations in the world and even in this country that only have 1 elder. I served in a congregation for 7 years with 2 elders, a congregation the size of yours. There's a need for elders and ministerial servants even in this country, even in this area. Now you add to that, the yearbook also said that there were 16 million people who attended the memorial this last year. We also got that announcement at the convention the other day, this past year. There are 6 million plus individuals in the truth. 16 million plus attended the memorial. Now you don't have to be great at math to know that's 10 million people, besides dedicated baptized witnesses who have some affection for Jehovah. Now what if all of a sudden those 10 million people decide to come in the truth? And it could happen. Their hearts could be touched, and all of a sudden we have this flow of people coming into truth. Who would teach them the truth? Who would train them in the ministry? Who would assist them to make the necessary changes in their life? Who would assist in building kingdom halls and assembly halls for them to meet in? Who would provide literature and magazines for them to read and to use in the ministry? You know who it is. It's you young sisters and you young brothers in your youth, in your vitality, your vigor, your strength. You see, if that doesn't convince you that you're needed in Jehovah's organization, you are the future of Jehovah's visible organization. We need you young ones to really take the truth seriously and do something about it. Build your future with Jehovah's organization. Now our Sometimes our young ones feel, you know, Brother Fields, I couldn't do that. I just could not do that. I can't do what Jehovah wants me to do. Is that really true? Is it really, really true that we can't pioneer, we can't go to Bethel, we can't be missionaries, we can't build our future in Jehovah's organization? Well, let me tell you a little story that might emphasize that or illustrate the point. It's one of those once upon a time stories, not true. But it does help us to reason on it. It had to do with a man that lived in the country. And when he was, a little boy was growing up one day, his father always bought chickens from the neighbor next door. And so one day while the man and his family was gone, the farmer came over to deliver some chickens. And so he just left the cage, the coop of chickens on the front porch. And when the family came home, the chickens had all gotten out of the cage and they were running all over the yard. And so the man rounded up his children and his wife and whatever, and they went out and started trying to catch these chickens. And they were chasing chickens all over the neighborhood. And the father of the family was getting a little upset. He couldn't believe that farmer brought those chickens over and left them there and them not at home. So they chased chickens, and finally the father really got upset. And he called the farmer and he said, listen, I cannot believe you left those chickens on my front porch unattended. When we got home, all of those chickens were out running around in the yard, and we've been chasing them for quite some time now. And I want you to know we were only able to catch 11 chickens. And the farmer said, yeah, 11 chickens, that's pretty good. I only delivered 6. So you see the moral of that story. That if we did not impose our own limits on ourselves, if we didn't know what our limitations were, there's no wonder at the things we could accomplish. You see, sometimes we restrict ourselves, we hold ourselves back because of those self-imposed limits. As it were, we might be able to catch 11 or more chickens, spiritually speaking, if we just didn't hold ourselves back with our own limitations. So we encourage you again, don't hold yourself back. Let Jehovah use you. When I was going into traveling work, you can imagine how frightful a feeling that is. And a brother really, really said something to me that encouraged me. I was afraid to go into traveling work. I was scared. Shirley was scared. We were both afraid. First of all, we don't have a spiritual heritage. We're first generation witnesses, so our families weren't the truth. And we thought you had to have a heritage to do something like this. And so a brother said to me, he said, hey, Gene, he said, do you think Jehovah could accomplish that traveling work without you? I said, oh, yeah, Jehovah could do anything. He doesn't need me. He said, well, don't you think he could do it with you then? Now, what am I going to say to that? So here I am. And he's working very hard to make it a success, but we're still here in the traveling work. Now, you think about that. Can Jehovah do things with you? Absolutely. See, don't hold yourselves back. Now, our last point was this, that sometimes we feel that we're going to miss out on something, that we're going to be restricted in some way if we make a dedication, if we live a life that's in Jehovah's organization. Well, let me ask you this. Consider this. When you were a real young person, and maybe you're still young now, do you remember how your mom used to have to tell you all the time, you know, brush your teeth, take a shower, scrub the back of your neck, you know, do all those kind of things when you were young? And that felt so out of place for you. You just didn't like that. Maybe even felt restricted because mom's always telling you, scrub your neck and do things like that. Now if you're a teenager, how do you feel about taking a shower, cleaning your nails, and scrubbing your neck and what have you? If you're a girl, probably can't get you out of the shower. Isn't that true? We say, when are you going to get out of there? Now the point of that is this, that when we were young children, some of the things that we were required to do seemed so restrictive to us, and we just didn't like them at all. But when we got just a little bit older, we were more than ready to do those things. You see, as a teenager, you can't imagine someone saying to you, what is that smell? Or that your hair or your body or your clothes are soiled. You can't imagine someone saying that to you. So could the same thing be true of what might be viewed as restrictions to a young person, a teenager, or maybe older? That some of the things that Jehovah would ask you to do or not do that would seem so restrictive that when you get a little bit older, there may be something you just really want and desire to do. See, Jehovah knows what's best, just as your parents knew what was best in that situation. And really, when you think about it, what are you going to miss out on? What is it that you'll miss out on in this world if you live the world? I can tell you. Oh, you may miss out on a few diseases, maybe a number of headaches, maybe some jail time or prison time, maybe an unwanted pregnancy. Sound like you're missing out? I don't think so. It reminds me of another story that I heard, and this one illustrates what the world is really like, what Satan is really, really like, and what he'd like to do to young people. And it's a story about a man that was fishing one day, and as he was on the fish bank, he noticed a squirrel up in a tree, and it was intent on something out in the river, just really looking at it and pacing back and forth on this tree limb. And finally the man noticed that out in the river some distance was a log, and on that log were several nuts, walnuts or pecans or something up on that log. And this squirrel was looking at them. So he said the squirrel was peering out into the water, and so he was watching. The squirrel was trying to decide how can he get those nuts. So finally he decided that if he went back to the end of the limb and ran just as hard as he could, that he could sail out to that log, and then he could have those nuts. So not thinking about what he's doing, what have you, he runs back and he runs as hard as he can, and sure enough he sailed out into the water and almost made it to the log and swam up there right quick and pulled up on the log, and boy were those nuts good. They were so good. But now he's in trouble. How is he going to get back to the bank? You see, he was up in the tree and he could sail out. Now he's in the water and he has to get back to the bank, and it's a long ways. So the fisherman's watching him, and the squirrel's walking back and forth on the log and back and forth. And finally he decided to get on that end, and he'd run just as hard as he could and jump as far as he could, and then he'd swim the rest of the way. So sure enough, that's what he did. He ran just as hard as he could and hit several feet from the bank, and he started swimming. And all of a sudden, the next thing the fisherman saw just terrified him. All of a sudden, a huge alligator came up out of the water and grabbed that squirrel. And down he went, just devoured him. The next thing that the fisherman saw horrified him. That alligator come up out of the water, crawled up on the bank, picked up a few more nuts, swam back out in the water, and lined him up on his back. Does that not make you think of Satan and what he'd like to do to our young ones? You see, he'll take anything that looks good, anything that looks delicious, anything that looks tempting, and he will try his best to lure our prime individuals, our young people, out into the world and get them out there, make it look so pleasant and it feels so good sometimes. And he gets them out there, and then they realize they can't get back to the congregation. It's just too far, too hard, and Satan will devour them. Friends, that's a funny little story, but it has a powerful, powerful punch to it when you think about it. And isn't it true, Satan will use any kind of tempting, interesting nuts, as it were, to draw our young ones out in the world. And sometimes, just like that story, it's up to the young ones to make the decision. Are they going to go or are they going to stay in Jehovah's organization? Sometimes we can't prevent them from making that decision. We want our young people to make a good decision. We want them to stay in the truth. We do not want them to be lured out into the world and to be devoured by Satan. Please give serious consideration to building your relationship with Jehovah's organization. You see, there are many, many opportunities to build for the future in Jehovah's organization. Getting baptized, as we said, as a youth, makes you feel accountable. It does make you feel more responsible. By all means, make that commitment. Bethel service is a fine goal for many of our young brothers. You parents should consider how you can help your youth, your brothers, your sons, to be able to reach that goal. Now, I can tell you for sure, Shirley and I do not have children. We do not have sons. But if we did, as much as we would miss them and as many tears as we would shed, because they're all the way across the United States, I guarantee you we want them to be in Bethel. We've been back there. We've worked back there briefly. We've visited back there. There's nothing better than that a young brother could be in Bethel, as much as you'd miss him. And you've heard the counsel, if your son goes, don't call him up and cry and tell him how much you miss him. Call him up and say, you stay back there. You belong back there. And then you get off the phone and then you cry. But you tell him to stay back there and work back there and build his relationship with Jehovah. No place better you can be than in Bethel. Missionary work is an avenue of service that's open to young married couples. Why not give it a consideration? Why not think about it? Why not do it? Ministerial training school is a branch of Gilead training that's open only to single elders and ministerial servants.
Another field of activity that you young brothers need to give serious thought to, or not so young even. Regular pioneer service is open to all who qualify, both brothers and sisters, married, single, makes no difference. And I'll promise you that the Pioneer Service School is a 2-week course that if you get to attend it, you never will forget it. I can prove that. How many of you have been to the Pioneer Service School? See, they didn't forget. Look at that. And I promise you, it's spiritually upbuilding, encouraging you to. The one way I like to describe it is just 2 weeks of snuggling up with Jehovah. And now some of our sisters and brothers are going to get to go again. What a joy that's going to be. Sign language or foreign language service is another avenue that affords many blessings to one's spiritual goals. We now have a list made up of all those who speak a foreign language within the circuit. We wrote the elders and asked, please give us the names of the individuals and the languages they speak so that we might be able to help to reach individuals in our territory who speak a foreign language. Why not learn one? Why not do that? We have language classes available for any who might want to attend. If we have enough individuals, we have one in this area. And so it's something to give serious thought to. We have a Samoan group in the circuit. And so that would be a nice language to give consideration to if you wanted to really be used. Sign language is another area, another language that needs attention in this area. Moving where the need's great. Single people, married people, brothers, sisters, doesn't make any difference. There's a need for publishers and pioneers. Even in the United States, even up and down the western United States, there's areas where there are needs. So when you look at the future, your future, the system of things, the future of this system of things and its organization, there's nothing left in this world that's going to survive. But for those individuals in Jehovah's organization, for you personally, and for your future with Jehovah's organization, the future is full and it's bright, exciting to think about because it's going to last forever. So we exhort all of you young ones, brothers, sisters, whatever age you are, all of you that are associated with Jehovah's organization, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember with affection, with action. Be enthusiastic for Jehovah's service. Develop a self-sacrificing spirit. The greatest career that you can get involved in is a career with Jehovah's organization. It's the only organization that's going to survive. There's plenty to do in the work, have plenty to do in the work of the Lord. There's a lot of work to do. And the best thing you can do as a young person is to pursue that work full time. The best is yet to come in Jehovah's new world. Between now and then, there's nothing better than you can do than get hooked up with Jehovah's organization fully. Don't waste your youth. Don't waste your life on this system. Build your future with Jehovah's organization. It is absolutely the best way of life. We certainly hope there's something in there that's encouraging to our young ones. And if you're at the age now that maybe you've retired and you're wondering what you're going to do the rest of your life, you know those principles apply to you too. If you're new in the truth and you're not as young in years, but you're new in the truth, you know those principles all apply to you. If you've been in the truth for a long time and you're not young in years, you know those principles apply to you too. And so give it serious thought. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? Something serious to think about. As far as the rest of the week's activities are concerned, tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock we'll meet here at the Kingdom Hall with the regular pioneers. That's tomorrow at 6 here at the Kingdom Hall. At 7 o'clock we'll meet with the elders and ministerial servants. That's here at the hall as well. Sunday at 10 o'clock we'll have your public talk. Whose values do you cherish? And then we'll have a Watchtower summary, and then the concluding talk, are you a grasshopper? And again, we encourage you, don't make that decision until after you hear the talk. Then you'll make that decision. Field service tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at the Sandlin home. Tomorrow afternoon at 1:15 at the same location. Saturday morning here at the Kingdom Hall at 9 o'clock. And then Sunday after the meeting, another meeting for field service. So maybe all of you can make that sometime during the week. The other day we had over 40 at the Sandlin home. We thought we were going to have to move out in the yard. And that was nice to be able to see. We've had big groups every day, so we appreciate that. Right now, let's stand. We'll sing a song. It's number 221.